Sarah Matthews clutched her torn dress as she stumbled through the rocky desert terrain. The hot Arizona sun beat down mercilessly on her fair skin, already burned red from 3 days of walking. Her water had run out yesterday and her lips were cracked and bleeding. Behind her, somewhere in the distance, she could still hear the war cries of the Comanche raiders who had destroyed her family's wagon train. She had been traveling with her father, a merchant, and her younger brother Tommy to start a new life in California. They were part of a small group of settlers who thought they could make the dangerous journey safely. They were wrong. The attack came at dawn when most people were still sleeping. Sarah watched in horror as the raiders killed her father and took Tommy prisoner. She had managed to escape into the desert, but now she wondered if dying quickly would have been better than this slow torture. The landscape around her was harsh and unforgiving. Tall red rocks jutted up from the ground like ancient monuments. Cacti and thorny bushes dotted the sandy ground, and rattlesnakes sunned themselves on the warm stones. Sarah had never seen such a wild and dangerous place. Back in Missouri, everything was green and gentle. Here, everything seemed designed to hurt or kill. As the sun began to set, painting the sky deep orange and purple, Sarah collapsed behind a large boulder. She could go no further. Her feet were bleeding through her worn shoes and every muscle in her body ached. She closed her eyes and tried to pray, but the words wouldn't come. She had lost everything and everyone she loved. What was the point of praying now? That's when she heard the horses. Sarah's eyes snapped open and her heart began racing. Through a crack in the rocks, she could see 3 riders approaching. Even in the fading light, she could tell they were Native Americans. Their long black hair flowed behind them as they rode, and they carried bows and spears. Sarah pressed herself against the rock, trying to make herself invisible, but it was too late. One of the riders had spotted her hiding place. He dismounted and walked slowly toward her, his moccasins silent on the rocky ground. Sarah scrambled backward until she was pressed against the boulder with nowhere to go. The man who approached her was tall and lean, with bronze skin and piercing dark eyes. His hair was braided with feathers and beads, and he wore a leather vest decorated with intricate beadwork. Unlike the Comanche raiders, this man didn't look cruel or violent. There was something calm and steady about him that made Sarah's panic ease slightly. "Water," he said in heavily accented English, offering her a leather pouch. Sarah stared at him in confusion. Was this a trick? She had heard terrible stories about what Indians did to white women, but her thirst was so great that she couldn't resist. She grabbed the pouch and drank deeply, the cool water soothing her parched throat. "Thank you," she whispered. The man studied her carefully, taking in her torn dress, her sunburned skin, and her obvious exhaustion. "You are alone," he said. It wasn't a question. Sarah nodded, afraid to speak. The other 2 riders had dismounted now and were watching the scene with interest. They spoke to each other in their own language, words that sounded like music to Sarah's ears despite her fear. "Comanche?" the first man asked, pointing in the direction Sarah had come from. "Yes," Sarah managed to say. "They killed my family, took my brother." The man's expression darkened. He spoke rapidly to his companions, and Sarah caught the word Comanche several times. Whatever he was saying, the other men didn't like it. Their faces grew hard and angry. "I am Black Hawk," the first man said, turning back to Sarah. "Apache, Comanche are our enemies too." Sarah felt a small spark of hope. If these Apache men were enemies of the Comanche, maybe they would help her. Maybe she wasn't going to die alone in this desert after all. "Please," she said, struggling to her feet. "Can you help me find my brother?" "The Comanche took him." Black Hawk shook his head sadly. "Comanche village is far. Many warriors. We are only 3. Sarah's heart sank. She had hoped against hope that somehow she could save Tommy. Now she realized how foolish that hope had been. A 12-year-old boy taken by Comanche raiders was as good as dead. "What will happen to me?" she asked. Black Hawk looked at her for a long moment. "You cannot survive alone in desert. You come with us." Relief flooded through Sarah, followed immediately by fear. She had heard stories about what happened to white women captured by Indians. Some said they were killed quickly. Others said they were kept as slaves and treated worse than animals. A few lucky ones were eventually ransomed back to white settlements, but they were never the same afterward. "Where will you take me?" she asked. "Our village. You will be safe there." Sarah wanted to believe him, but she had no choice anyway. It was go with these Apache men or die alone in the desert. At least with them, she had a chance of survival. Black Hawk helped her onto his horse, settling her in front of him on the saddle. Sarah tensed as his strong arms encircled her to hold the reins, but his touch was gentle and respectful. As they rode through the desert night, she found herself leaning back against his solid chest, drawing comfort from his warmth. The Apache village was hidden in a canyon between two mesas. Sarah could see fires flickering in the darkness and hear the sound of voices and laughter. It seemed like a peaceful place, but she knew that could change quickly once the people saw her. As they rode into the village, people began to gather around them. Sarah heard excited voices speaking in Apache, and she saw many curious faces staring at her in the firelight. Some looked friendly, others suspicious, and a few openly hostile. Black Hawk dismounted and helped Sarah down from the horse. She swayed on her feet, exhausted from the ride and overwhelmed by everything that had happened to her. A group of Apache women approached, their faces showing a mixture of curiosity and concern. One elderly woman stepped forward and spoke to Black Hawk in rapid Apache. Sarah couldn't understand the words, but the woman's tone was clearly questioning. Black Hawk responded calmly, gesturing toward Sarah several times. "What are they saying?" Sarah asked nervously. "They want to know why I brought a white woman to our village," Black Hawk replied. "They are worried about soldiers coming to look for you." Sarah's stomach dropped. She hadn't thought about that possibility. If the army came looking for her, they might attack the Apache village. She would be responsible for getting innocent people killed. "Maybe I should leave," she said quietly. Black Hawk looked at her steadily. "Where would you go? Desert will kill you in one day." He was right, of course. Sarah was trapped between two impossible choices: stay and possibly bring death to these people who had shown her kindness, or leave and die alone in the wilderness. As if sensing her distress, Black Hawk placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You are under my protection now," he said firmly. "No harm will come to you while I live." Sarah looked up into his dark eyes and saw something there that made her breath catch. It wasn't just kindness or duty. There was something deeper, something that made her heart beat faster despite everything she had been through. The elderly Apache woman who had questioned Black Hawk stepped closer to Sarah, studying her with sharp, intelligent eyes. Her weathered face was lined with years of desert sun and hard living, but her gaze was not unkind. She spoke again to Black Hawk, this time in a softer tone. "White Dove says you need food and rest," Black Hawk translated. "She will care for you tonight." Sarah felt tears of gratitude welling up in her eyes. After days of running and hiding, someone was offering her basic human kindness. White Dove gestured for Sarah to follow her, leading her to a traditional Apache dwelling made of branches and animal hides. Inside the shelter, White Dove had prepared a simple meal of corn mush, roasted meat, and wild berries. Sarah ate hungrily, hardly caring that the food was unlike anything she had eaten before. The Apache woman watched her with maternal concern, occasionally clicking her tongue and shaking her head at Sarah's obvious exhaustion. As Sarah ate, she became aware of voices outside the shelter. The conversation seemed heated, with several people speaking at once. She caught Black Hawk's voice among them, calm but firm. White Dove noticed her listening and patted her hand reassuringly. "Men talk," she said in broken English. "You safe here?" But Sarah could hear the tension in the voices outside, and she knew her presence was causing problems for these people. Some members of the tribe clearly didn't want her there, and she couldn't blame them. White settlers and Apache people had been fighting for years. Many Apache had good reason to hate and fear any white person who entered their territory. When Black Hawk finally entered the shelter, his face was serious. He sat down across from Sarah, and she could see the weight of leadership in his expression. She had begun to realize that he wasn't just an ordinary warrior. Other people deferred to him and sought his opinions. "Some of my people are afraid," he said honestly. "They think keeping you here will bring soldiers in trouble." "They're right to be afraid," Sarah replied quietly. "Maybe I should try to reach the nearest town on my own." Nearest town is 3 days' ride through dangerous country. Comanche patrol these lands, and there are mountain lions, bears, and rattlesnakes. You would not survive. Sarah wrapped her arms around herself, feeling the hopelessness of her situation. "Then what can I do? I don't want to bring harm to your people." Black Hawk was quiet for a long moment, staring into the small fire that burned in the center of the shelter. When he spoke, his voice was thoughtful and careful. "There is another way," he said slowly. "In Apache tradition, a woman can choose her protector. If you were to belong to someone in the tribe, you would be under their protection. The tribe would accept you as family." Sarah felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment. She understood what he was suggesting, even though he had said it diplomatically. You mean marriage? Yes, but not as white people think of marriage. Apache women have rights and respect. A husband does not own his wife. They are partners. The idea terrified and intrigued Sarah at the same time. She barely knew this man, yet he had already shown her more kindness and protection than anyone in her old life ever had. Her father had been planning to arrange a marriage for her to a much older merchant in California, a man she had never met and who saw her only as a business transaction. Would you? She began, then stopped, too embarrassed to finish the question. Blackhawk seemed to understand anyway. I would be honored to protect you, he said simply. But the choice must be yours. I will not force you. Before Sarah could respond, angry voices erupted outside the shelter. She heard the sound of horses approaching fast, and Blackhawk immediately tensed, his hand moving to the knife at his belt. Stay here, he commanded, rising swiftly and moving toward the entrance. But Sarah could already hear what was happening outside. More horses were arriving, and the voices were getting louder and more agitated. Through the hide walls of the shelter, she could see the flickering shadows of many people moving around in the firelight. White Dove appeared at Sarah's side, her face worried. She spoke rapidly in Apache, clearly trying to explain what was happening, but Sarah could only catch a few words. Then she heard a voice that made her blood run cold. It was speaking English with a harsh, demanding tone. We know you have the white woman. Hand her over now and no one needs to get hurt. Sarah's heart nearly stopped. Somehow someone had tracked her to the Apache village. But who? And how had they found her so quickly? Blackhawk's voice replied from outside, calm but firm. There is no white woman here. You are mistaken. Don't lie to us, Apache. We saw the horse tracks leading here. We know you took her from the desert. Sarah crept closer to the entrance of the shelter, trying to see what was happening outside without being spotted. Through a gap in the hide covering, she could see mounted men with guns pointed at the Apache villagers. There were at least 8 of them, all heavily armed and clearly dangerous. The leader of the group was a big man with a scraggly beard and cold, cruel eyes. Sarah didn't recognize him, but something about him made her skin crawl. This wasn't a rescue party sent by the army or by concerned settlers. These men had their own agenda. The woman belongs to us, the leader continued. She's our property now and we want her back. Sarah felt sick to her stomach. These men weren't here to save her. They were here to claim her for themselves. She had heard stories about men like this, outlaws and renegades who lived outside the law and took whatever they wanted. Somehow they had learned about her escape from the Comanche and had come to take her for their own purposes. I told you, Blackhawk replied steadily. There is no white woman here. The leader laughed, a harsh sound that made Sarah shiver. Then you won't mind if we search your village. Just to make sure. You are not welcome here, Blackhawk said, and Sarah could hear the steel in his voice. Leave now while you still can. Is that a threat, Apache? Because we've got 8 rifles pointed at your people right now. Are you really willing to see them die for one white woman? Sarah couldn't stand it anymore. These people had shown her nothing but kindness, and now they were in danger because of her. She couldn't let innocent Apache men, women, and children be hurt or killed because she was hiding among them. She pushed aside the hide covering and stepped out of the shelter into the firelight. Immediately, all eyes turned to her and she heard several of the outlaws whistle and make crude comments. Here I am, she said, trying to keep her voice steady. Let these people alone. Your quarrel is with me. The leader of the outlaws grinned, showing yellow, broken teeth. Well, there she is, boys. Just like we heard. Young, pretty, and all alone in the world. Blackhawk moved protectively in front of Sarah, his entire body tense and ready for violence. She is under my protection, he said firmly. Your protection? The outlaw leader laughed again. Apache, you don't seem to understand. This woman doesn't belong to you. She belongs to us. We've got a buyer waiting for her and he's paying good money. Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. These men were slave traders, planning to sell her to someone who would use her for unspeakable purposes. The thought of what awaited her made her feel weak with terror. Please, she whispered. But she wasn't sure if she was talking to the outlaws or to Blackhawk. The Apache warrior looked back at her, and she saw something fierce and protective in his dark eyes. When he turned back to face the outlaws, his voice was deadly calm. The woman chooses her own fate, he said. That is Apache law. Apache law doesn't mean anything to us, the leader snarled. Now step aside or we'll kill every one of you and take her anyway. That's when Sarah made her decision. She couldn't let these good people die because of her, but she also couldn't let herself be taken by these evil men. There was only one choice that might save everyone. She stepped out from behind Blackhawk and looked directly at the outlaw leader. I won't belong to you, she said as loudly and clearly as she could. I claim Apache protection. I choose Blackhawk as my protector. The outlaw leader's face twisted with rage. You don't get to choose, little girl. You're coming with us whether you like it or not. But Blackhawk had already moved. In one fluid motion, he drew his bow and nocked an arrow, pointing it directly at the outlaw leader's heart. She is mine, he said simply, and I protect what is mine. The tension in the village was so thick Sarah could almost taste it. Blackhawk stood motionless as a statue, his arrow aimed directly at the outlaw leader's heart. The other Apache warriors had also drawn their weapons, creating a circle of protection around Sarah and their families. The firelight danced across their faces, making them look like ancient warriors ready for battle. The outlaw leader, a man Sarah now knew was called Briggs, tried to maintain his confidence. But she could see sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool desert night. He had expected to ride in and take what he wanted without resistance. He hadn't counted on facing Apache warriors willing to die to protect one white woman. You're making a big mistake, Apache, Briggs said, his voice less steady than before. That woman is worth a lot of money to some very dangerous people. They won't give up easy. Neither will we, Blackhawk replied calmly, never moving his aim from Briggs's chest. One of the other outlaws, a thin man with nervous eyes, whispered urgently to Briggs. Maybe we should just leave, boss. These Apache look ready to fight and we're outnumbered. Shut up, Weasel, Briggs snapped. I'm not leaving empty-handed. But Sarah could see that his confidence was shaking. The Apache village had more warriors than she had initially realized. Men were emerging from the shadows, all armed and all looking deadly serious. What had seemed like an easy raid was turning into a potential massacre. Last chance, Apache, Briggs said, trying to sound threatening. Hand over the woman or we start shooting. Blackhawk didn't even blink. First arrow goes through your heart. Second goes through your friends. My warriors will kill the rest before you can fire a second shot. Are you ready to die for one woman? For a long moment, nobody moved. Sarah held her breath, knowing that the next few seconds would determine whether she lived or died, whether innocent Apache people would be killed because of her presence. Then Briggs made his choice. With a snarl of frustration, he jerked his horse's reins and backed away from the village. This isn't over, he shouted. We'll be back, and next time we'll bring more men. You can't protect her forever. We can try, Blackhawk said simply, still not lowering his bow. The outlaws rode off into the darkness, their curses and threats fading into the night. Only when Sarah could no longer hear their horses did the Apache warriors begin to relax their guard. Blackhawk finally lowered his bow and turned to look at Sarah. In the firelight, she could see the concern in his eyes. You have made a brave choice, he said, but also a dangerous one. Those men will return with more fighters. Sarah felt the weight of what she had done settling on her shoulders. By claiming Apache protection, she had committed herself to a life she didn't understand with people she barely knew. But the alternative, being sold into slavery by Briggs and his men, was unthinkable. I meant what I said, she told him quietly. I choose you as my protector, if you'll have me. The other Apache villagers had gathered around them now, talking in low, urgent voices. Sarah could see the worry on their faces. They all understood that her presence would bring more trouble to their peaceful village. An older man with gray hair and intricate tattoos on his arms approached Blackhawk. Sarah sensed immediately that this man was important, perhaps the chief or an elder. He spoke in rapid Apache, his tone serious and questioning. Blackhawk responded respectfully, but Sarah could hear the determination in his voice. Whatever the older man was saying, Blackhawk was standing firm in his decision to protect her. Finally, the older man turned to look at Sarah directly. His weathered face was stern but not unkind. When he spoke, his English was careful but clear. I am Chief Running Bear, he said. Blackhawk tells me you have claimed our protection. Do you understand what this means? Sarah swallowed nervously. I think so. It means I become part of your tribe, part of your family. Yes, but it also means danger for all of us. White soldiers may come looking for you. Outlaws will return with more men. Are you willing to share this danger with us? The question was fair, and Sarah appreciated his honesty. These people owed her nothing, yet they were willing to risk their lives for her. The least she could do was be completely honest with them. I don't want to bring danger to anyone, she said, but I have nowhere else to go. My family is dead and those men want to sell me like property. If you'll give me a chance, I'll do whatever I can to earn my place here. I'll work hard and learn your ways. Chief Running Bear studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Apache women are strong. They must be to survive in this land. Are you strong enough to become Apache? I don't know, Sarah answered honestly, but I'm willing to try. The chief looked at Black Hawk and some kind of understanding passed between them. Then he turned back to Sarah. Tomorrow, if you still choose this path, there will be a ceremony. You will be adopted into our tribe as Black Hawk's woman. But tonight, you must think carefully. Once the ceremony is complete, there is no going back to your old life. Sarah felt her heart racing. A ceremony to make her Black Hawk's woman, his wife. She barely knew him, yet she would be binding herself to him forever. In her old world, this would be scandalous and impossible. But her old world was gone, destroyed by Comanche raiders and threatened by men like Briggs. I understand, she said quietly. White Dove appeared at Sarah's side and spoke gently to Chief Running Bear. The old woman seemed to be asking for permission for something. White Dove offers to prepare you for the ceremony. The chief translated. She will teach you what you need to know about Apache marriage customs. Sarah looked at the kind Apache woman who had already shown her such generosity. I would be honored to learn from her. As the crowd began to disperse, Black Hawk approached Sarah. In the dying firelight, his face was serious and thoughtful. Are you certain about this choice? He asked. Life as an Apache woman is not easy. The desert is harsh and our enemies are many. You would be giving up everything you knew before. Sarah thought about her old life, the restrictive dresses, the endless rules about proper behavior for ladies, the expectation that she would marry a stranger chosen by her father for business reasons, that life had offered safety and comfort but little freedom or respect. What I knew before is gone, she said. I have to build a new life somehow. And you've been kind to me when you had no reason to be. You've protected me when you could have just left me in the desert to die. I could not leave you to die, Black Hawk said simply. It would not be right. Why? Sarah asked. I'm a stranger, a white woman whose people have been your enemies. Black Hawk was quiet for a moment, looking up at the stars that blazed brilliantly in the clear desert sky. When I first saw you hiding behind that rock, he said finally, you reminded me of a wounded bird. Frightened and hurt, but still fighting to survive. I admire courage even in small creatures. Sarah felt warmth spreading through her chest at his words. And now? Now I see that you have the heart of a warrior. You stepped out to face those outlaws to protect people you barely know. That takes great bravery. They stood together in comfortable silence for a while, watching the last embers of the fires die down. Around them, the village was settling into sleep, but Sarah knew she wouldn't rest easy tonight. Tomorrow would change everything. Black Hawk, she said finally. What if I can't learn to be a good Apache wife? What if I disappoint you? He turned to look at her, and in his dark eyes she saw something that made her breath catch. Not just kindness or duty, but something deeper and warmer. Then we will learn together. He said gently, marriage is not about perfection. It is about two people choosing to face life as partners. As White Dove led Sarah back to the shelter where she would spend her last night as a single woman, Sarah's mind was spinning with everything that had happened. In the space of a few hours, she had gone from being a terrified refugee to a woman about to marry an Apache warrior. She thought about her brother Tommy, still captive somewhere with the Comanche, and felt guilt pierce her heart. Should she be thinking about marriage when Tommy might be suffering or dead? But what could she do? She was one woman with no resources and no allies except the Apache who had taken her in. Maybe someday, if she became strong enough and learned enough about this land, she could find a way to search for Tommy, but right now survival was her only option. And survival, she was beginning to realize, might mean more than just staying alive. It might mean finding a new way to live, to love, and to belong somewhere. As she lay down on the soft furs White Dove had prepared for her, Sarah listened to the night sounds of the desert. The distant howl of coyotes, the rustle of small creatures in the brush, the whisper of wind through the canyon walls. Tomorrow she would wake up as a different person, with a different name and a different destiny. The thought terrified her. But for the first time since her family's death, it also filled her with something that might have been hope. Sarah woke before dawn, her heart pounding with anxiety about the day ahead. She could hear the village coming to life around her, the soft voices of women preparing breakfast, children laughing as they played, and the deeper tones of men discussing the day's work. Everything sounded so normal, yet today would change her life forever. White Dove entered the shelter carrying a bundle of clothes and a bowl of water. The older woman's face was kind but serious as she began helping Sarah prepare for the ceremony. She spoke in her broken English mixed with Apache words, trying to explain the significance of what Sarah was about to do. Apache marriage sacred, White Dove said as she helped Sarah wash with the cool water. Not just joining of man and woman, joining of families, of spirits. You understand? Sarah nodded, though she wasn't sure she truly understood the depth of what White Dove was telling her. In her old world, marriage had been about property and social position. Here it seemed to mean something much deeper and more spiritual. White Dove held up the clothes she had brought, a beautiful dress made of soft deerskin, decorated with intricate beadwork in blues and yellows. The craftsmanship was exquisite, and Sarah could see that many hours of careful work had gone into making it. This was my daughter's dress, White Dove explained, her voice soft with memory. She died of fever 3 winters ago. I kept dress for special day. I think she would want you to wear it. Sarah felt tears spring to her eyes at the woman's generosity. I can't take something so precious to you. Yes, you can, White Dove said firmly. My daughter cannot wear it now. Better it helps new Apache daughter begin her life. This makes me happy, not sad. As White Dove helped her into the dress, Sarah marveled at how different it felt from the restrictive corsets and heavy skirts she was used to. The deerskin was soft and flexible, allowing her to move freely. The beadwork caught the morning light coming through the shelter entrance, making her feel beautiful in a way she had never experienced before. White Dove then began working on Sarah's hair, braiding it with feathers and small bells that chimed softly when she moved. As she worked, she told Sarah about Apache marriage customs and what would be expected of her as Black Hawk's wife. Apache women have power, White Dove explained. We own our homes, our children take our family names, and we can divorce husbands who treat us badly. But with power comes responsibility. You must be strong, work hard, and support your husband as he supports you. This was very different from what Sarah had been taught about marriage in white society. There, women were expected to be silent and obedient with no rights of their own. The idea that she would have real power and status as an Apache wife was both exciting and intimidating. What if I make mistakes? Sarah asked nervously. What if I don't know how to do things the Apache way? White Dove smiled and patted her hand. All new wives make mistakes. I will teach you to cook our food, to prepare hides, to make clothes and baskets. Other women will help too. Apache women take care of each other. When White Dove finally finished her preparations, she stepped back to admire her work. Beautiful, she said with satisfaction. Black Hawk will be proud to call you wife. The mention of Black Hawk made Sarah's stomach flutter with nervousness. She was about to marry a man she had known for less than a day. What if they didn't suit each other? What if he regretted his decision to protect her? What if she could never truly fit into his world? Before she could worry any longer, she heard voices outside the shelter announcing that it was time for the ceremony. White Dove gave her an encouraging smile and led her outside into the bright morning sunshine. The entire village had gathered in a circle around a small fire that burned in the center of the camp. Sarah could see Black Hawk standing on the opposite side of the circle, wearing his finest clothes, a shirt decorated with porcupine quills and silver ornaments, and leather leggings with intricate beadwork. His long hair was braided with eagle feathers, and he looked every inch the noble warrior. Chief Running Bear stood beside the fire, holding a sacred pipe and various ceremonial objects. When he saw Sarah, he nodded approvingly at her appearance and began to speak in Apache. His voice carried clearly across the circle, and though Sarah couldn't understand the words, she could feel the solemnity and importance of what he was saying. White Dove gently guided Sarah to stand across from Black Hawk, with the fire between them. As the ceremony continued, different members of the tribe came forward to speak or sing. Some of the songs were haunting and beautiful, telling stories of great love and partnership that had lasted through many hardships. Then Chief Running Bear switched to English, apparently for Sarah's benefit. "Today we witnessed the joining of two spirits," he said in his measured voice. "Black Hawk of the Apache people, and Sarah of the white people who chooses to become Apache. This is not just a marriage, but an adoption. Sarah will no longer be white woman alone. She will be Apache woman, with all the rights and responsibilities that brings." The chief then called Black Hawk forward. The warrior walked around the fire to stand beside Sarah, his movements graceful and confident. When he took her hands in his, Sarah felt a shock of awareness pass between them. His hands were strong and calloused from years of hard work, but his touch was gentle. "Black Hawk," the chief said, "do you take this woman as your partner? Will you protect her, provide for her, and honor her as an equal?" "I will," Black Hawk replied solemnly, his dark eyes never leaving Sarah's face. "Sarah," the chief continued, "do you choose to leave your old life behind and become Apache? Will you support your husband, care for his family, and live by our laws and customs?" Sarah took a deep breath, knowing that her next words would seal her fate forever. "I will," she said, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. The chief then brought out a beautiful woven blanket and wrapped it around both Sarah and Black Hawk, binding them together. "As this blanket covers you both, so your lives are now woven together. What affects one affects the other. Your joys will be shared joys, your sorrows shared sorrows." He sprinkled something that smelled like sage and sweetgrass over them, and the smoke rose up toward the sky. Sarah felt a strange sense of peace settling over her, as if something inside her was finally coming home after a long journey. "You are now husband and wife," Chief Running Bear announced. "Sarah Matthews is dead. You are now." Swift Deer looked around their new home, taking in the carefully crafted details. Everything showed Black Hawk's skill and patience. The smooth wooden bowls, the comfortable sleeping furs, the weapons displayed on the walls. It was clear he had put thought and care into creating a space that would welcome a family. "It's beautiful," she said softly, running her fingers along an intricately woven basket. "You made all of this?" "Most of it. Some things were gifts from my family." Black Hawk watched her explore their home, and she could sense his nervousness beneath his calm exterior. "Are you having doubts about your choice?" Swift Deer turned to face him, studying his strong, honest face. "Are you?" "No," he said immediately. "But I want you to be happy here. I know this is very different from the life you knew before." Before Swift Deer could answer, shouts erupted from outside their shelter. Both of them tensed, recognizing the alarm in the voices. Black Hawk immediately grabbed his bow and moved toward the entrance. "Stay here," he commanded, but Swift Deer followed him anyway. Outside, they could see a young Apache scout riding hard into the village, his horse lathered with sweat. He was shouting something in Apache that made all the warriors reach for their weapons. "What is it?" Swift Deer asked urgently. Black Hawk's face had gone grim. "The outlaws have returned. They brought many more men with them, and they're riding this way." Swift Deer felt her blood turn to ice. Briggs and his men were coming back, just as they had threatened. And this time they would be prepared for Apache resistance. "How many men?" Black Hawk asked the scout in English. 20, maybe more," the young man replied breathlessly. "All armed with rifles. They will be here before the sun is high. 20 armed outlaws against the handful of Apache warriors in the village." The odds were terrible, and Swift Deer knew it was all her fault. If she hadn't been here, these good people wouldn't be facing this danger. Chief Running Bear had emerged from his shelter and was quickly organizing the village's defenses. Women and children were being moved to a more protected area deeper in the canyon, while the warriors prepared for battle. "I have to leave," Swift Deer said urgently to Black Hawk. "If I'm not here, maybe they'll go away and leave your people alone." "No," Black Hawk said firmly. "You are my wife now. We face this together. But your people will be killed because of me. My people will fight because it is right," Black Hawk replied. "Those men are slavers and criminals. Even if you were not here, they would be our enemies." Swift Deer wanted to argue, but she could see the determination in her husband's eyes. He had made his choice, and nothing she said would change his mind. As the village prepared for the coming battle, Swift Deer found herself thinking about her new name and what it meant. Swift Deer was not a helpless victim waiting to be rescued or taken. She was an Apache woman now, and Apache women were strong. "Teach me to use a bow," she said suddenly. Black Hawk looked at her in surprise. "What?" "If there's going to be a fight, I want to help." I won't hide while others risk their lives for me." For a moment, Blackhawk looked like he was going to refuse. Then he saw the determination in her eyes and nodded slowly.
"There is no time to teach you properly," he said.
"But I can show you the basics." He quickly demonstrated how to hold the bow, how to nock an arrow, and how to aim. Swift Deer's first attempts were clumsy, but she was a quick learner and desperation gave her focus. "Remember," Blackhawk said as he watched her practice, "you don't have to be perfect. You just have to be brave." As the sound of approaching horses grew louder, Swift Deer realized that her new life as an Apache woman was about to be tested in the most brutal way possible. But for the first time since her family's death, she wasn't facing danger alone. She had a husband who respected her strength, and a tribe that had accepted her as family. Whatever happened next, she would face it as Swift Deer, Apache woman and warrior. Deer, Apache woman and wife of Blackhawk. Swift Deer. Sarah tested her new name silently and found that she liked it. It suggested speed and grace, qualities she would need to survive in this harsh but beautiful land. The ceremony concluded with more singing and the sharing of a special meal that the village women had prepared. Everyone congratulated the new couple, and Sarah, Swift Deer, was amazed by how warmly she was welcomed into the community. Even the people who had been suspicious of her presence the night before seemed genuinely happy for her and Blackhawk. As the celebration continued around them, Blackhawk led his new wife to a shelter that had been prepared for them. It was larger than the one she had stayed in the night before, with beautiful rugs and pottery that spoke of a comfortable, well-established home. "This is our home now," Blackhawk said simply. "I built it 2 years ago, hoping someday to find a wife to share it with." Swift, the sound of thundering hooves echoed through the canyon as Briggs and his enlarged gang approached the Apache village. Swift Deer crouched behind a large boulder alongside Blackhawk and 3 other warriors, her hands trembling slightly as she gripped the bow he had given her. The morning sun was climbing higher, casting sharp shadows across the rocky terrain that would either hide them or expose them to enemy fire. Chief Running Bear had positioned his warriors strategically throughout the canyon, using the natural rock formations for cover. They were outnumbered, but they knew this land intimately while the outlaws were strangers to the desert terrain. It was their only advantage and they would need to use it wisely. "Remember," Blackhawk whispered to Swift Deer, "wait for my signal. Aim for the center of their body, not their head, and stay low." Swift Deer nodded, her mouth dry with fear. She had never shot at another human being before, had never even held a weapon with the intent to harm someone. But she thought of the cruel look in Briggs's eyes, of what he and his men planned to do with her, and her resolve hardened. The outlaws rode into the village clearing with confidence, their rifles ready and their faces eager for violence. Briggs was in the lead, his scraggly beard and cold eyes exactly as Swift Deer remembered. Behind him rode nearly 24 men, all armed and dangerous looking. "Apache!" Briggs shouted, his voice echoing off the canyon walls. "We know you're hiding up there in those rocks. Send down the woman and we'll ride away peaceful-like. Keep hiding her and we'll burn this whole village to the ground." Chief Running Bear's voice answered from a concealed position above them. "The woman has chosen her path. She is Apache now under our protection. Leave our lands in peace," Briggs laughed harshly. "Apache protection doesn't mean much against 20 rifles, old man. You've got maybe 6 or 7 warriors at most. Do the math." "Numbers do not always determine victory," the chief replied calmly, "especially when some men fight for honor and others fight only for money. Honor doesn't stop bullets." Briggs snarled. He turned to his men. "Spread out! Find them and flush them out. Bring me the woman alive, but kill anyone who gets in your way." The outlaws immediately began dismounting and taking cover behind rocks and scrub brush, their rifles scanning the canyon walls for targets. Swift Deer felt her heart pounding so hard she was sure everyone could hear it. Blackhawk touched her shoulder gently. "Stay calm," he whispered. "Fear makes your hands shake and your aim poor. Breathe slowly and think of protecting your family." Your family. The words gave Swift Deer strength she didn't know she had. These people were her family now, and families protected each other. The first shots came from the outlaws as they tried to force the Apache warriors out of their hiding places. The sound of gunfire was deafening in the enclosed canyon, and Swift Deer flinched as bullets struck the rocks near their position, sending chips of stone flying. Blackhawk drew his bow and sent an arrow flying toward one of the outlaws who had exposed himself too much. The man cried out and stumbled, clutching his shoulder. The Apache warrior immediately ducked back down as return fire peppered their position. "Now," Black Hawk said urgently. Swift Deer rose up just enough to see over their rock shelter. She spotted an outlaw moving between two boulders, trying to get a better angle on one of the Apache positions. Her hands were steadier than she had expected as she drew back the bowstring and aimed. The arrow flew true, striking the man in the leg. He fell with a shout of pain and anger, and Swift Deer felt a mixture of satisfaction and sickness at having hurt another human being. But there was no time to think about it as more bullets whistled overhead. The battle continued for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes. The Apache warriors were skilled and knew how to use their terrain advantage, but the outlaws had superior firepower and numbers. Gradually, the outlaws were working their way closer to the Apache positions. Swift Deer had managed to hit 2 more men with her arrows, though neither shot was fatal. She was getting better at the rhythm of battle. Rise up, aim quickly, shoot, duck down before return fire could find her. Black Hawk stayed close beside her, offering quiet encouragement and tactical advice. Then disaster struck. One of the younger Apache warriors, eager to prove his bravery, exposed himself too much while trying to get a clear shot at Briggs. The outlaw leader's rifle cracked and the young man spun around and fell, clutching his chest. "No," Swift Deer gasped, recognizing the fallen warrior as the scout who had brought warning of the outlaw's approach. Black Hawk's face went hard with grief and anger. The wounded warrior was his nephew, barely 18 years old. Without thinking, Black Hawk started to rise from their cover to help the boy. "Wait," Swift Deer grabbed his arm. "It's what they want, for you to expose yourself." But Black Hawk was beyond reason, driven by the need to save his family member. He broke from their position and ran toward his wounded nephew, zigzagging to avoid the bullets that immediately followed his movement. Swift Deer watched in horror as Briggs took careful aim at her husband. Time seemed to slow as she saw the outlaw leader's finger tighten on the trigger, saw the rifle barrel track Black Hawk's running form. Without conscious thought, Swift Deer stood up completely, ignoring the danger to herself. She drew her bow back as far as she could and sent an arrow flying toward Briggs just as he fired at Black Hawk. Her arrow struck Briggs in the shoulder, spinning him around and spoiling his aim. His bullet went wide, missing Black Hawk by inches. The outlaw leader roared with pain and fury, turning his rifle toward Swift Deer. "There she is," he bellowed. "Kill the Apache, but take the woman alive." Several outlaws immediately focused their fire on Swift Deer's position. She dove for cover as bullets shattered the rock around her. But she had achieved her goal. Black Hawk had reached his nephew and was dragging the wounded boy to safety. The battle was turning uglier now, with both sides taking casualties. Swift Deer could see that the Apache were gradually being forced back deeper into the canyon. They were fighting bravely. But they couldn't hold out much longer against such overwhelming odds. That's when she heard a sound that made her heart leap with hope. The thunder of many horses approaching from the mouth of the canyon. But her hope turned to despair when she realized it might be more outlaws coming to reinforce Briggs. Then she heard the bugle call, clear and sharp in the desert air. It was the U.S. cavalry riding hard toward the sound of gunfire. "Soldiers," one of the outlaws shouted. "Army patrol coming," Briggs cursed violently. He had been so focused on capturing Swift Deer that he hadn't posted lookouts. Now he was trapped in the canyon with wounded men and no escape route except past the approaching cavalry. "Fall back," he yelled to his men. "We're getting out of here." But the soldiers were already at the canyon mouth, blocking the only easy exit. The outlaws found themselves caught between the Apache warriors above and the cavalry below. "This is Lieutenant Morrison, United States Army," a voice called out. "Throw down your weapons and surrender." Some of the outlaws immediately dropped their rifles and raised their hands, recognizing the hopelessness of their situation. But Briggs and a few of his most loyal men continued fighting, trying to shoot their way out of the trap. Swift Deer watched from her hiding place as her husband and the other Apache warriors emerged from cover to help the soldiers round up the remaining outlaws. The battle was over, but she couldn't quite believe they had survived. When Black Hawk found her among the rocks, his face was streaked with dust and blood, but his eyes were shining with pride. "You saved my life," he said simply, pulling her into his arms. "That arrow you put in Briggs, it saved me from his bullet. Is your nephew—" Swift Deer couldn't finish the question. "He will live. The bullet went through his shoulder, not his heart. He will have scars, but he will heal." As they held each other among the smoking ruins of the battlefield, Swift Deer realized that she truly was Swift Deer now, not Sarah Matthews. She had fought beside her husband and her tribe, had shed blood to protect her family. Whatever happened next, she belonged here in this harsh, beautiful land with these brave, generous people. The white woman who had stumbled out of the desert just days ago was gone forever. In her place stood an Apache warrior woman, tested by fire and proven worthy of the name she now carried. Lieutenant Morrison was a young officer with sun-weathered skin and intelligent blue eyes. He approached the Apache village with his hands visible and empty, showing respect for Chief Running Bear and his warriors. Swift Deer watched from beside Black Hawk as the soldier and the chief spoke in careful, formal tones. "Chief Running Bear," the lieutenant said, "we heard gunfire and came to investigate. We found these men attacking your village. Can you tell me what happened here?" The chief gestured toward the captured outlaws, most of whom were now sitting in the dust with their hands bound behind their backs. Briggs glared at everyone with pure hatred, blood still seeping from the arrow wound in his shoulder. "These men came to steal a woman from our village," Chief Running Bear explained. "We defended our people, as is our right." Lieutenant Morrison's gaze swept over the scene, taking in the wounded warriors, the defensive positions, and the evidence of a fierce battle. His eyes stopped when he spotted Swift Deer standing among the Apache, clearly dressed as one of them but obviously of white ancestry. "Ma'am," he said politely, "are you the woman they were trying to take?" Swift Deer felt Black Hawk tense beside her, ready to defend her if necessary, but she stepped forward confidently, her chin raised with the pride she had learned from Apache women. "I am Swift Deer, wife of Black Hawk and daughter of this tribe," she said clearly. "These men wanted to sell me as a slave. The Apache protected me and gave me a home." The lieutenant looked surprised by her response. Clearly, he had expected her to beg for rescue and return to white civilization. Instead, she stood proudly beside her Apache husband, every inch the defiant warrior woman. "Ma'am, if you've been held against your will," he began. "I have not," Swift Deer interrupted firmly. "I chose to become Apache. I chose my husband. These men," she pointed at Briggs and his gang, "they are criminals and slavers. They would have sold me to men who would have used me horribly." One of the captured outlaws, the nervous man called Weasel, suddenly spoke up. "She's lying, Lieutenant. We were hired to rescue her from the Apache. She's been brainwashed or something." Briggs shot him a murderous look, clearly wishing his subordinate would keep quiet. But it was too late, the damage was done. "Rescue her?" Lieutenant Morrison asked sharply. "Who hired you to rescue her?" Weasel realized his mistake immediately and clamped his mouth shut, but the lieutenant was too experienced to let the matter drop. "I think we need to have a longer conversation about this," Morrison said grimly. He turned to his sergeant. "Put these men under arrest. Charges include attempted kidnapping, assault with deadly weapons, and attacking peaceful Indians." As the soldiers began loading the prisoners onto horses for transport to the nearest fort, Briggs managed one last venomous threat. "This isn't over, woman," he snarled at Swift Deer. "There are others who want you and they won't give up. You can't hide behind Apache skirts forever." Black Hawk stepped forward menacingly, but Lieutenant Morrison held up a hand to stop him. "That's enough," the officer said to Briggs. "You're in serious trouble already. I'd suggest keeping your mouth shut from now on." After the prisoners were secured, Lieutenant Morrison asked to speak privately with Chief Running Bear, Black Hawk, and Swift Deer. They gathered in the chief's shelter, where the officer explained the larger situation. "We've been tracking these men for weeks," he said. "They're part of a larger criminal organization that specializes in kidnapping women and selling them to brothels in Mexico and California. Apparently someone put a bounty on your head specifically, ma'am." Swift Deer felt cold fear creep up her spine. "Who would do that?" "I'm nobody special." "That's what we need to figure out," Morrison replied. "These men aren't going to give up easily. Even with Briggs and his gang captured, there will be others who come looking for you." Chief Running Bear spoke gravely. "My people cannot live in constant fear of attack. Perhaps it would be better—" "No," Black Hawk interrupted firmly. "Swift Deer is Apache now. Apache protect their own. We will not abandon her to these criminals." The lieutenant studied the determined faces around him and nodded slowly. "I respect your courage, but you need to understand what you're up against. This criminal network has connections in high places. They have money and resources." "What do you suggest?" Chief Running Bear asked. There's a garrison about 50 miles north of here. If you're willing, I could arrange for some of your people to stay there temporarily until we can track down whoever is behind this bounty." Swift Deer shook her head immediately. "I won't ask these people to leave their homes because of me. There has to be another way." Lieutenant Morrison looked thoughtful. "Actually, there might be. We've been trying to infiltrate this criminal network for months. If you were willing to help us." "Absolutely not," Blackhawk said before the officer could finish. "You want to use my wife as bait. I will not allow it." "Hear me out," Morrison said quickly. "We know they want her alive. If we could arrange for word to get out about where she is, we could set a trap. With proper preparation and enough soldiers, too dangerous," Chief Running Bear said firmly. "Apache have learned not to trust white man's plans." Swift Deer listened to the men argue about her fate and felt frustration building inside her. In her old life as Sarah Matthews, men had made all the important decisions about her future. She had hoped that becoming Apache would give her more control over her own destiny. "Stop," she said loudly, silencing the discussion. "This is my choice to make. My life. My decision." The three men looked at her in surprise, clearly not used to a woman asserting herself so boldly in such matters. "Lieutenant Morrison," she continued, "tell me more about this plan. How would it work?" Blackhawk started to protest, but Swift Deer held up her hand to quiet him. "I need to hear all the options," she said. "Running and hiding won't solve this problem. These criminals will keep coming until they're stopped." Morrison explained his idea in more detail. The army would spread word that Swift Deer was living at a specific location with minimal protection. When the criminals came to take her, soldiers would be waiting in ambush. It was risky, but it could end the threat once and for all. "And if something goes wrong?" Blackhawk asked grimly. "Then I die fighting instead of living in fear," Swift Deer said simply. "I've already lost one family to violence. I won't lose another because I was too afraid to take a risk." The shelter fell silent as everyone contemplated the weight of her words. Finally, Chief Running Bear spoke. "This is a warrior's choice," he said with respect. "Swift Deer has proven her courage in battle. If she chooses to fight again, Apache will support her." Blackhawk looked at his wife for a long moment, and she could see the conflict in his dark eyes. He wanted to protect her, but he also respected her right to make her own decisions. "If we do this," he said finally, "I go with her. Wherever the trap is set, I will be there. And I," Chief Running Bear added, "and any warrior who chooses to volunteer." Lieutenant Morrison looked surprised by the offers of support. "This could be very dangerous for all of you. These aren't honorable opponents. They're ruthless criminals who will kill anyone who gets in their way." "Then they will find that Apache can be ruthless too," Blackhawk said quietly. Swift Deer felt a surge of love and gratitude for these brave people who were willing to risk their lives for her. A few days ago, she had been a helpless refugee with nowhere to turn. Now she was surrounded by family who would stand with her against any danger. "Then we'll do it," she said with finality. "We'll set the trap and end this threat once and for all." As they began planning the details of their dangerous gambit, Swift Deer realized that her transformation from Sarah Matthews to Swift Deer was still not complete. There was one more test waiting for her, one more chance to prove that she truly belonged in this harsh but beautiful world she had chosen. This time, she wouldn't just be defending herself and her new family. She would be taking the fight to her enemies, striking back against the forces that had tried to reduce her to property to be bought and sold. The frightened girl who had hidden behind a rock in the desert was gone forever. In her place stood a woman ready to fight for her freedom and her future no matter what the cost. 3 weeks later, Swift Deer sat in a small cabin near the settlement of Copper Creek, watching the sun set over the mountains. The cabin was deliberately isolated with only one Apache warrior visible as a guard. To anyone watching from a distance, it would appear that she was lightly protected and vulnerable to attack. What the watchers couldn't see were the 20 soldiers hidden in the surrounding rocks and trees, or the 6 Apache warriors concealed in positions that would cut off any escape routes. Lieutenant Morrison and Blackhawk had spent days planning every detail of the trap, and now all they could do was wait. Swift Deer wore a simple white woman's dress that Morrison had provided, though she felt strange and constricted in the heavy fabric after weeks of wearing comfortable Apache clothing. The idea was to make her look like a rescued captive who had been returned to white society, making her appear more vulnerable to potential kidnappers. Blackhawk was hidden in the cabin's small root cellar, armed with his bow and several knives. If attackers broke into the cabin, he would be her last line of defense. Swift Deer could feel his presence below the floorboards, and it gave her comfort even in this dangerous situation. They had been waiting for 5 days now, and Swift Deer was beginning to wonder if their plan had failed. Maybe the criminal network had learned about Briggs's capture and decided the risk was too great. Maybe they had given up on her entirely. Then, just as the last light was fading from the sky, she heard the signal she had been waiting for. The call of a night bird, repeated 3 times. It was the Apache scout positioned on the ridge above the cabin, warning that riders were approaching. Swift Deer's heart began beating faster, but she forced herself to remain calm. She moved to the window and lit a lamp, making sure she would be clearly visible to anyone watching the cabin. Then she sat down at the small table and pretended to read a book, playing the part of an unsuspecting woman enjoying a quiet evening. The attack came just after full darkness fell. Swift Deer heard the soft sound of boots on the cabin's wooden porch, followed by whispered voices. These weren't Briggs's crude outlaws. These men moved with professional skill and discipline. The door suddenly exploded inward, torn off its hinges by a small explosive charge. 3 men in dark clothing rushed into the cabin, their faces covered by bandanas. The first one pointed a pistol at Swift Deer while the other 2 quickly searched the small space. "Don't move and don't scream," the leader said in a cultured voice that surprised Swift Deer. This man spoke like an educated gentleman, not a common criminal. "We're here to take you somewhere safe." "Safe from what?" Swift Deer asked, playing her part as a confused and frightened woman. "From the savages who kidnapped you, of course," the man replied smoothly. "We represent certain parties who are very concerned about your welfare. You'll be much better cared for where we're taking you." The lies came so easily to him that Swift Deer realized this man had probably deceived many women before her. She wondered how many other innocent victims had believed his false promises of safety. "I don't understand," she said, backing away from them. "The soldiers said I was safe here." "They said the soldiers don't know what they're dealing with," the leader interrupted. "Trust me, you need to come with us now." One of the other men had finished searching the cabin. "Place is clear, boss. Just a woman and 1 Apache guard outside." "Good, grab her and let's go. The others are waiting with the horses." As the men moved toward her, Swift Deer backed against the far wall of the cabin. This was the moment of greatest danger. She needed to give Blackhawk time to act while not getting herself killed in the crossfire. "Please," she said loudly. "I don't want to go anywhere. I'm safe here." The leader was losing patience. "Look, lady, we can do this easy or we can do this hard, but you're coming with us either way." That's when Blackhawk erupted from the floor like an avenging spirit. The hidden door of the root cellar burst open, and the Apache warrior came up with a knife in each hand. His first throw took down the man nearest to Swift Deer, the blade sinking deep into the kidnapper's chest. His second knife caught the searcher in the throat before the man could even draw his weapon. The leader spun around in shock, trying to bring his pistol to bear on Blackhawk, but Swift Deer was already moving. She grabbed the heavy lamp from the table and smashed it over the man's head, sending burning oil cascading across his clothes. The leader screamed and stumbled backward, frantically trying to put out the flames. Blackhawk was on him in seconds, bearing him to the ground and pressing a knife to his throat. "Don't move," the Apache warrior said calmly, "or you'll join your friends." Outside the cabin, Swift Deer could hear gunfire and shouting as the hidden soldiers and Apache warriors closed in on the rest of the kidnapping party. The battle was brief but intense, and then silence fell over the area. Lieutenant Morrison appeared in the doorway, his uniform dusty but his expression satisfied. "All captured or dead," he reported. "Your plan worked perfectly." Blackhawk hauled the burned and terrified leader to his feet, keeping the knife at his throat. The man's fine clothes were singed and his cultured manner had completely disappeared. "This one's going to tell us everything he knows," Morrison said grimly, starting with who hired him and why. Over the next hour, as the prisoner was questioned by the soldiers, the full scope of the conspiracy emerged. Swift Deer learned that her ordeal had begun not with random bad luck, but with a deliberate plan by her father's former business partner. The man, named Garrett Hoskins, had been cheating her father for years and had stolen most of the money from their trading ventures. When her father discovered the theft and threatened to expose him, Hoskins had arranged for the Comanche attack on their wagon train. He had planned for the entire family to be killed. But when he learned that Swift Deer had survived, he put a bounty on her head. He was afraid she might know something about his business dealings, the captured leader explained. Eager to save his own life, he wanted her taken alive so he could find out what she knew, then dispose of her quietly. Swift Deer felt sick as she listened to the details. Her family's death hadn't been a random tragedy. It had been murder, planned and executed by a man her father had trusted. Her brother Tommy had died because of one man's greed and fear. Where is Hoskins now? Morrison demanded. San Francisco. He's got a big house on Nob Hill and thinks he's untouchable. Morrison looked at Swift Deer with sympathy. I'm sorry you had to learn the truth this way, but at least now we know who's behind it all. We'll send word to the authorities in California. Hoskins will face justice for what he's done. But Swift Deer wasn't satisfied with the idea of distant justice. The rage that had been building inside her since her family's death now had a specific target, and she wanted to face the man who had destroyed her old life. I want to go to San Francisco, she said quietly. Blackhawk looked at her in alarm. Why would you want to go back to that world? You are Apache now. Your place is here with your people. Hoskins killed my family, Swift Deer replied, her voice hard with determination. As long as he's alive and free, he's a threat to anyone who might expose his crimes. And he needs to pay for what he did to Tommy and my father. Morrison shook his head. Ma'am, I understand how you feel, but San Francisco is no place for someone in your situation. You've made a new life here with the Apache. Why risk that? Because some debts can only be paid in person, Swift Deer said. She looked at Blackhawk, seeing the conflict in his eyes. He understood her need for justice, but he also feared losing her to the white world she had left behind. If you go, he said finally, I go with you. It could be dangerous, she warned. Blackhawk smiled. The first time she had seen him look truly amused since they had set the trap. More dangerous than fighting outlaws and slave traders? I think we can handle one corrupt businessman, Chief Running Bear, who had been listening to the conversation in thoughtful silence, finally spoke up. Swift Deer has earned the right to choose her own path, he said. If she needs to settle this debt from her old life before she can be fully at peace in her new one, then she should go. But she goes as an Apache woman with Apache warriors to protect her. Swift Deer felt tears of gratitude in her eyes. These people understood her in a way that no one in her old life ever had. They respected her need for justice and her right to make her own choices. Then we go to San Francisco, she said with finality. As she looked out at the desert landscape that had become her home, Swift Deer realized that her transformation was finally complete. She was no longer running from her past or hiding from her enemies. She was taking control of her own destiny, backed by the love and support of her chosen family. Sarah Matthews had been a victim, helpless and afraid. But Swift Deer was a warrior, and warriors faced their enemies head-on. Whatever waited for her in San Francisco, she would meet it with courage and the unshakable knowledge that she was no longer alone in the world. The frightened girl who had begged for protection behind a desert rock was gone forever. In her place stood a woman ready to claim justice for her family and secure her future with the people who had given her a new life and a new name. She was Swift Deer, Apache woman and warrior. And she was ready for whatever came next.